Welcome to episode 38 of the Daft Previews podcast, where we will be previewing round 5 of the NRL season. My name is Luke, and as you can see, or if you can't see, I'll let you know, my co-host Dan is off with COVID-like symptoms, so you're stuck with me for this evening. Good news is, however, you're stuck with the perfect round from 4-0 on best bets last week, so do the same thing this week, keep the ball rolling. I'll give you my 4 best bets for this coming round. Then I'll give you Dan's 4 best bets, and then I'll go through and preview every NRL game. So my 4 best bets for this coming round, the NRL, I've got Souths minus 9.5, Parramatta minus 7.5, under 38.5 in the Brisbane Roosters game, and West Tigers under 11.5. And that multied up there will get you around $11.70 to $12. Dan's gone Melbourne Storm minus 12.5, Souths minus 8.5, Para minus 7.5, and the Panthers at minus 18.5. All up there on Sportsbet at $13.03. So hoping to do a repeat of last week. If you followed my tips, you would have got a perfect 4-0 and multied them up. You would have finished on a nice little 13-1 multi. So what we'll do is we'll go through the games. Starting off on Thursday, we have Newcastle taking on Manly Sea Eagles. Knights, from a team list perspective, has named the same 17 players. Saifidi returned to the runner, so Leah Thompson to the bench. Frizzell has been named despite having hamstring tightness. Whereas the big news is with Manly, with Tommy Trbojevic out with a knee injury for 4 to 6 weeks. So apologies if I butcher this name, but Tuatau Kula comes in over at fullback. They've named Christian Tuapolotu at centre, with Brad Parker named amongst the reserves. And then Ethan Bullimore is named at 18th man. In terms of a betting, if you were quick enough yesterday to jump on when Tommy Turbo was ruled out, you would have got a nice juicy line bet on, because that line has certainly moved. Newcastle are minus 1.5 point favourites in this game. So how you look at this game will come down to, do you think that 35% win rate Manly have without Tom Trbojevic is going to be good enough? Me personally, I think this is a tough game to predict, just because last week you could clearly see Tommy Turbo was injured for the whole game. Even though he did score and look okay, they won on the back of Cherry Evans. So it's not exactly a clear-cut, Newcastle going to win, because they've also had a bit of a form dip in the last couple of weeks since Pong has returned, actually. So either with this game here, I haven't got a best bet on it, but I would, if you are going to play it, I would just take the head-to-head Newcastle of $1.80, just because they are the home team. It will be a big crowd up at Newcastle, and if you do take them on some betting sites, they do have a promo where if your team's up by half-time, they'll pay out. So that's how I see that play going. Otherwise, I think it's still going to be a closer game than people anticipate. Dan's actually gone the other way. He's going against the public. He's taking Manly at $2 head-to-head, so confident that Manly can do it without Tommy Turbo, which in recent years hasn't been the case. Then we move on to Friday's first game, which sees Warriors take on the Cowboys up at Moreton Bay Redcliffe. Team news. Warriors aren't missing any player. Sean Johnson's been moved into the 7 jersey. So that's a big in for them, as last week he was named as a reserve, then moved into the starting lineup. So they're obviously going to keep that setup there happening. Tough game for me also again to predict. The Cowboys, however, the Hammer is out and Scott Drinkwater moves to fullback. So the Hammer has been pretty effective this season. It is a Warriors home game, but it is in Queensland. Otherwise, in terms of changes, there are just some moves around on the starting lineup and where the players are starting, but otherwise Hammer is the only big name out. Currently on the betting market for this game, it is again very close. There's not much in it. $1.85 Warriors, $1.95 Cowboys, with Warriors 1.5 point favourites. Warriors came off a very impressive win last week. Whereas the Cowboys were very disappointing against the Roosters. Was it a question of, the Cowboys winning a couple of games against easy opposition, because since then the teams they've beaten have looked pretty awful, and that was their first test and they really were blown off the park. For me, it's a similar play. I'm not a massive fan of betting on the Warriors full stop, but if I am going to take a play, I would do the same again and just take the Warriors head to head. You do get them at $1.85. I wouldn't risk the -1.5, because I've seen Warriors games where they can lose a game by a point, or win only by a point. So that's the way I would play it. In terms of Dan, what he's playing it as, sorry, I'll bring that up for you. He's got the Cowboys as well head to head. So very similar bets there. Moving on to what Dan calls the main event on Friday night, we have the Brisbane Broncos up against the Roosters. In terms of teams, Pat Carrigan is out with a knee injury for 4 to 6 weeks. Albert Kelly has a foot injury, so obviously he was treading on Payne Haas's shoes before getting injured with the foot there and getting clocked by him. But then you've also got the multi-suspended Tommy Flegler, who could not help himself last week. So that means Billy Walters will move into the halves. Palacia starts at prop. Kobe Henderson starts at lock. Kate Wall is back into the team, whereas Rabati drops to the bench. Corey Pays and Corey Jensen also join the bench, with Branko Lee also out. Trent Robinson's named to start the same 17, so he's also given himself the run in now, so he should be back for this game here. Connor Watson was listed to start, but they might swap him again back to the bench on game day. This one is not as close as the previous two games. Broncos are $4 head to head, $1.26 Roosters, with the line at 13.5 points. This game here, I am leaning the unders. A big spot where Brisbane are being hammered by the media. They're not going to be, the same Broncos that rolled out a couple of weeks. They're going to have a bit of fight in them. The Roosters, however, are staying up in Queensland from Townsville down to Brisbane, so they don't have to worry about the travel. But a big play for me is just the Broncos' attack is absolutely woeful at the moment. Going through their results, they scored two tries against South in round 1, and one was an intercept. The Dogs, they only scored 3 tries, and you saw last week how bad their defense was, and one was from a strip, 1-on-1. They scored two tries against the Cowboys, and one was a penalty try. And then last week against the Warriors, it was Adam Reynolds grubbering to himself. So there's definite problems in attack with the Broncos. Reynolds is being forced to be that main man, and it's not who he is. If you look at who he's played with in the past, he always just plugs around, does his bit. He's not the main man in attack at Souths. So I definitely think there's problems with the Brisbane attack. At the same time, the Roosters did look good last week, but they haven't been blowing teams off the park. Round 1, they only scored 1 try against the Knights. Against the Manly Sea Eagles, they did score 5 tries, but then they only scored the 3 against the Rabbitohs, which one was laid on. And then even against the Cowboys last week, they scored 6 tries, but Sam Walker's kicking is awful. But that was against a team that had 3 men in the sin bin, the Cowboys. So the best part of nearly half a game, the Roosters were playing with a man up. So they only scored 28 points, I should say. I think Brisbane will keep it competitive to begin with, but I don't think they can score. I think the Roosters are too good at defence to hold them out. But then at the same time, I don't think Roosters' attack is good enough to cover that points line. So that's why I'm taking the under 38.5. But Dan, on the other hand, has gone the complete opposite. I think he's predicting a 40-10 Brisbane win, basically. But we've gone opposites on that game. Then we move on to the Saturday game at 3 o'clock, which is played at Wagga Wagga between Canberra and the Storm. Canberra really are a travelling team this season. They're getting all the country games and getting stooged with that. Ricky Stewart's named the same 17 that lost to Manly last week, with Tom Starling listed on the run-on side, and then Bellamy, after a clinical performance last week, named the exact same 17. So we've got 2 unchanged teams playing against each other this week. Surprise, surprise, the bookies don't give Canberra much of a chance at $3.85, Melbourne Storm $1.26, whereas the line is 12.5 points favourites for the Storm. A lot of people made comments last week, Dan spoke about it, where the big guns, so say, are starting to flex their muscles this now, and this is when you start to see that gap form between the top and the bottom. I have to agree with him on that. I can't see, the Canberra Raiders this year being that team, that keeps it close. The only time this year where they've looked decent is at home, but that's at GIO Stadium. I know they're the home team, but they are on the road at Wagga Wagga, so they're just as good as away at the moment, up against the Storm team who really started to click last week. So my lean on this one is similar to Dan's and taking the Storm minus 12.5. Then we move on to the 5:30 game with the South Sydney Rabbitohs up against the St George Illawarra Dragons. In terms of team changes, the Rabbitohs moved Jackson Paulo to the reserves after he suffered a concussion last week. Needs to pass the old HIA protocols. Josh Mansour, the Mansource, is back in the moment. Mark Nichols is actually out for an extended period of time after being confirmed with the old syndesmosis. He's actually going to see if he needs surgery this week. So Tom Burgess moves into the front row. Havili's back on the reserves with Blake Taff is on the bench. Dragons, Jaden Stewart's back into the starting lineup, so they'll add a bit of punch in the middle if he can keep his head down and not do something silly. Jake Gazetsky drops the reserves. Mbai has somehow kept his spot at fullback with Tyrell Sloan in the extended squad. So Tyrell Sloan's actually jumped at 21. So there's clearly something going on there at the moment. This line is currently at the minus 9.5 for Souths. Head-to-head, Souths $1.33, St George $3.35. Dan and I have gone similar on this game. If you go on Sportsbet, you'll get South for minus 8.5 if you're worried that for some reason Latrell will kick a field goal randomly. I think this is an absolute gem of a steal of a line at minus 8.5, minus 9.5. I think South last week against Penrith, I think people forget that how good Penrith were at home, and that's why I took South's unders. Souths are going to have a much better time playing the Dragons. Their last 3 games they've played Melbourne, Roosters, Penrith. 3 genuine contenders. Now they get to play the Dragons. Their first game since round 1 where they played the Broncos. So this is the first time where you'll get to see the Rabbitohs. And even during that run there, they did belt the Roosters as well. So they are a legit team playing a Dragons team who basically since probably even that game against Penrith, I felt have been very underwhelming. They played a Penrith team where they had numerous opportunities. They did feel they got ripped by the refs, but all they've had to their name so far is a win in round 1 against the Warriors, who, aren't exactly a form team to measure up against. They got beaten by Penrith. They got thrashed by the Sharks and absolutely humiliated by Para last week. And now they take on the Rabbitohs away. So I think that 9.5 is very good value there for that game. Moving on to the Saturday night main event, we've got the Gold Coast Titans at home against the Parramatta Eels. Titans have actually named a few changes from what was probably the worst game of the season or probably decade I've seen last week. Beau Fermor, Phil Sammy and Isaac Liu have been named to return to the starting side after being ruled out with COVID last week. I'm guessing they all live together or something. Sammy switches to the centres in case of replacement of Brian Kelly. Jaden Campbell's also still off for another week. Jermaine Asako will again start at fullback. Whereas the Eels, Sean Lane returns after missing last week's win over the Dragons. Madison shifting back to the bench. Mitch Rain also comes to 17 with Kara moving to the 18th player. Nia Corey and Jacob Arthur among the reserves. So Bryce Cartwright's flick pass wasn't good enough to stay in the lineup with Mitch Rain there coming on to 17. But the fact that Ryan Madison's been moved to the bench shows that Para have quite a fair bit of depth. This is also a repeat of the round 1 fixture where they played each other in basically one of the very high scoring games of the season. This one here, I think, again, similar to how Dan sees it, those big teams flexing. Para minus 7.5 at $1.90. Head-to-head, $1.40 Para. Titans, $2.95. I think Para and just a multi, $1.40 if you want to juice up, just chuck in a few legs and a low-scoring, low-cheap multi. That's absolute value because I think they'll smash this line. Titans very underwhelming so far this year, and I think their form just ties in with Fafita being very underwhelming. They look at their form this season. They lost 32-28 against Para. They showed a bit of opportunity there. They then beat the Warriors. Again, as I said previously, beating the Warriors. Dragons showed that. I don't think the Warriors are near a very quality team at the moment. They lost 24-22. They choked against the Raiders. And since then, have just choked. Like, they've just really looked awful. They only scored the one try, and it was a very lucky try on the 78th minute to beat the Tigers 8-6. Up against the Para team, who have just come off back-to-back victories. And really only a 2-point loss to the Sharks. And if one little bit of defensive effort there on the line could be easily undefeated with Penrith. They've gone down, beat Melbourne in Melbourne, and then come back up and flogged the Dragons. We'll be going up there. People might say a letdown spot there, but I think if someone likes any time try scorers, I think Clint Gutherson's your man, because he obviously wants to get one back over them mocking his celebration last week. So Dan and I have both taken Para -7.5. As I said there, it's one of my best bets as well, because I think that line is way too short at the moment. Moving into Sunday, the 4 o'clock kickoff sees Cronulla Sharks taking on the Tigers, the winless Tigers. Fitzy's named this unchanged squad that got the job done last week. Ikevala and Connor Tracy remain out, so they'll keep the big Talakai out in the centres after a really strong game running the ball last week. Madge is actually named the same 17 despite no wins on the board. Tuolangi has been included in the back row after he failed a HI in the first half and basically ruined my super coach and fantasy team. Jock Madden will stay in the halves because Jackson Hastings is one more a week away after being suspended. In terms of betting for this game, Sharks are $1.10, Tigers at $7. The line is -17.5 to Cronulla, plus 17.5 for the Tigers. This is a very big line. I think it could be a little bit too big, because we talk about, when are they going to burst the bubble? When are they going to put in a good performance? Sharks have looked very good. They are back at home. But even last week, they only scored 18 points against the Knights. I thought they should have scored a lot more. Yes, it's the Tigers, not the Knights. What I'm going to lean is the Tigers under 11.5, just because the Tigers' attack is woeful. But I think this is going to be a low-scoring game all round. But I'm not confident enough to say they'll cover the 17.5 Cronulla. Because I could see it being a 24-10 type of game, for example, or a 20-6, and that screws up that bet as well. So I'm going to take Tigers under 11.5. If you look at their history this year, the Tigers, as you know, they didn't score a single try last week. They relied on penalty goals. Week prior against the Warriors, they actually didn't score a single point in the second half of that game, so they've gone 120 minutes without a point. Round 2 against the Knights, they scored the one try in the 75th minute, and then round 1 there, they scored a couple tries in the first half and the one in the second half there against Melbourne. But again, round 1 form doesn't seem to be showing much, because since then they've been pretty woeful in attack. So I'm going to take them to get the unders 11.5. And on conversions this season, I think Luke Brooks is something like 2 from 6 or something. So he's 33% kicking, so I'm not backing them to kick 2 converted tries in a row. But now that I've said that, they'll probably fuck me over and do it, so good on him. In terms of Dan, he's gone the Tigers plus 17.5, so he's basically back in the same thing as me, and that, Tigers can keep it competitive for a little while, because, yeah, that's where I see it going as well. And then on to the final game of the round, absolute blockbuster game of the season, the Dogs up against the Panthers. The Dogs have made a change. They've brought Kyle Flanagan into the first grade squad, into the halfback position, with Brandon Wakeham shifting to the bench and Bailey Odo moving to 18th man. There are no other changes to the side, with Aaron Shook and Sia Manafanai, Jay Knockenboard among the reserves. Ivan Cleary's actually named the same squad. They got the job done last week. Fisher Harris, Liam Martin, are both back in the starting lineup, named in the starting lineup. Spencer Leniu and Sorensen back on the bench. Kickout did suffer a head knock, but does have a 9-day turnaround, is expected to play. Massive line, biggest line of the round. Currently 18.5 for Penrith, and $1.10 Penrith, $7 Canterbury. This game, a lot of people would be expecting, the Dogs to get flogged again. They are back at home. They're playing a Penrith team. I think the difference between someone like Penrith and Melbourne, Penrith aren't going to have those clinical games where they blow teams off the park. You only have to look back a couple of weeks ago. They're up against a Knights team that had a player sent off in the first half. Should have really just blown them off the park, and they still conceded points. So I think the bigger the game, the better the Penrith are. So I'm not confident taking the 18.5, whereas Dan has taken the 18.5. One thing I think with this game, if I'm going to back a team, I would take the Dogs plus 18.5. I think at some point it's got to gel their attack, and I think with Flanagan in the halves, with Burton, I know Flanagan has his defensive problems, but in attack, that just looks a lot better. Flanagan coming through a Roosters system, scored a ton of points for the Roosters, with Burton there as well. Weather is expected to rain quite heavy. So if you do want to make a play, you could play the unders in this game, because Burton will be putting them up as well as Cleary, and handling is going to be difficult. And the last time Canterbury played in those conditions was against Manly, and they did keep it tight for the whole game, finishing up 13-12. So my play in this game would be Dogs plus 8.5. Dan's gone Penrith minus 8.5 there as well. So other than that, no other picks from me. I'll post this up in the Discord. If you aren't a member of the Discord, jump in the Discord. That's where our tips are posted, and see you next time.